Hi, I'm Barbara. Welcome to Bee's Kitchen and Garden. Today's wonderful recipe is Scrumptious Chowder. And here is what our finished product will look like. Today we're going to use our fresh parsley that we planted in one of the gardening episodes. So instead of dried parsley, I'm going to harvest my fresh parsley. And this is going to be so flavorful and taste so good with our chowder today. I'm going to add salmon to the chowder so that we'll have a fish chowder today. The salmon is about 6 ounces, and I'm going to add some chopped parsley, our fresh parsley, some Italian seasoning, and cook it under the broiler for 18 to 20 minutes. Now, what I need for you to see is that there is water, and that is there for 2 specific reasons. One is we want to make sure that our salmon doesn't dry out in the broiler, and the other is we'll get some nice salmon broth out of that. So here we go, Italian seasoning and fresh parsley. And it goes under the broiler. I've chopped up about a cup of onions, and look what I found in my fridge, a nice piece of bell pepper. So I'm going to chop this up as well. I'm starting our chowder by taking 3 tablespoons of butter and melting it in the pan. I'll chop up the pepper, and then we'll put the onions and the pepper in with the butter. So I have chopped up the bell pepper, the cup of chopped onions, and they're going in the butter. We're going to cook them until, on a very slow heat, until the onions become transparent. To add to our chowder, we have 1 cup of chopped carrots, and I have 3 red potatoes, a sort of large one, a medium one, and a small one. So 3 mediums or whatever, but about 3 red potatoes are going into the chowder. Our onions and peppers are sauteed. They're in great shape, ready to go. So now I'm going to add the liquids. I came up with this recipe because we had fish left over one evening, and I thought, for lunch the next day, what can I do that's a little different? It's a cold day, and I thought, well, I'll just try making chowder. So I've refined the recipe for several times, and this is what I came up with. I use things that I have on hand. I always have chicken broth on hand, low sodium chicken broth. I always have milk on hand. So that's going to be the combination for our liquid, as well as whatever broth is set in the pan with the salmon. So we're going to take 3 cups, 2 cups of chicken broth into the pan with the onions and the peppers, and a 3rd cup here. Again, I use low sodium chicken broth. I don't have evaporated milk. I don't have fish broth or clam broth on hand in my house. You might, and you might want to use those. Okay, in addition to that, we're going to put in a 1.5 cups of milk. And I use 1% milk. I always have that. So that's what I use, is what I have on hand. So 1.5 cups of milk. There we go. And I'm going to put that on a slow cook. To our broth mixture, I'm going to add a little bit of fish broth from the cooked salmon. You'll notice I covered the salmon because it's already cooked. It doesn't need to go in at an early stage. So I'll use this fish broth, pour it in, and then I'm going to put the salmon in the fridge until I'm ready to use it. Now we're going to add the other chowder ingredients, including the 3 potatoes, which looks like it comes to about 3.5 to 4 cups. We're going to put that in because they need to cook. And we're going to put our cup of carrots in because they need to cook. You'll see we have some other ingredients later that don't need to cook as long. So I'm going to now add all my spices, and then I'm going to bring it to a slow boil and let it cook for about 15 to 20 minutes to get the potatoes soft and the carrots soft. Here we go with the spices. Number one, half a teaspoon each of black pepper, half a teaspoon of Old Bay seasoning. A nice spicy seasoning if you're not familiar with it, and I find it adds great flavor. So half a teaspoon of Old Bay, and then we go with a full teaspoon of basil. I don't have fresh basil yet, so I'm using dried basil, so a teaspoon of that. And I need a teaspoon of dried parsley, but look, we have our fresh parsley. So parsley and basil are very similar in that 2 teaspoons of fresh, whoops, I'll get a little more, spilled some, okay, that's 1 teaspoon. And here's another teaspoon. 2 teaspoons of fresh equals 1 teaspoon of dried for both parsley and basil. It's different for different spices. You know what? Let's just throw that all in there. That looks great. Okay, and stir again. And now we have 1 teaspoon of dried thyme. And 1 teaspoon of salt. And we are ready to bring this mixture to a low boil and let it cook for 15 to 20 minutes. Stirring that in. The chowder's been cooking for 20 minutes, and I've taken out one of the potato pieces to see if it's done. Let it cool because it will be hot. Soft, perfect. If the potatoes are done, then I know the carrots are done. Good with the broth. Now let's add our final ingredients. Number one, we have a cup of frozen green beans, cut green beans. If you have fresh, great. But I like to put a lot of veggies in my chowder, so I have a cup of chopped green beans, and I'm going to put in a cup of frozen corn. And I'm going to put in our fish, which I've started chunking here. Put the fish in chunks, and a firm fish like a haddock, a salmon, a cod will all work well this way because they won't get mushy. Other fish may get mushy on you. So these will stay in chunks in the chowder. Look at this chowder now. Lots of veggies. And here's our chunked up salmon. So I'm adding that to the chowder. And of course the spices on the salmon just add to more spices in the chowder. And it's getting nice and thick. I like a thick chowder. And I'm going to boil it, cook it now for another 5 minutes. But I like a thicker broth. So cornstarch is my thickener of choice. I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. Cornstarch and either cold water or cold broth. I'm using cold broth, equal amounts, 2 tablespoons. Whoa, okay, we've got 2 tablespoons of that. And then you stir with a fork, because if you put your cornstarch into a hot liquid like your chowder, it will immediately lump and you'll just have lumps of cornstarch. It won't thicken your broth. So now we have to make sure that we're scraping the bottom and that all of the cornstarch, there's a little sticky part on the bottom. All of the cornstarch needs to be liquidized, if you will, with the chicken broth. I use chicken broth because that's what's in my chowder. You could use just cold water, but make sure it's cold. Now what you do is you take that liquid, start stirring your chowder, and pour it in and continue stirring, continue stirring, continue stirring, and that will thicken up the broth part of your chowder so that it becomes a little more thick. And as this now cooks for another 5 minutes, that will help it to thicken. If you'd like it even thicker, additional cornstarch and additional broth. One short tip, I like to make the chowder ahead of time, either in the morning or at lunchtime. Let it cool, put a lid on it, put it in the refrigerator, and then warm it up in the evening. And I think that helps the spices to soak in even more for a better taste. All right, our chowder has cooked, slow boiled for another 5 minutes, and look what we have. Scrumptious chowder, nice and thick with lots of ingredients and vegetables. And to top it all off, we are going to garnish with some chives, and fresh chives and fresh parsley. And there we are. Enjoy.